Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sunset event of the Value Reporting Foundation, or the VRF. We're here to celebrate the progress that SASB, the IIRC, and the Value Reporting Foundation have made over the last 10 years and our upcoming consolidation into the IFRS Foundation at the end of this month. As part of the IFRS Foundation, we'll support the new International Sustainability Standards Board and continue to drive connectivity between sustainability disclosure and financial statements. Over the last decade, it's been our goal to help create a system for sustainability disclosure and integrated reporting that has the commensurate level of maturity, credibility, and acceptance as financial accounting. Thanks to the collective effort of many, many people, including all of you, we're nearing this vision. This milestone would not have been possible without your participation and your support over many, many years. So to begin our program, let's look back to the very beginning, to the founding of the IIRC and SASB.
If I think back of what were some of the sort of initial, I think we actually might be able to do something here. It was when we met with Dan Doctorow. We go into Bloomberg and we talk for about 10 minutes. He says, that's great, we'll give you $1 million. I thought, wow, this is easier than I thought. Obviously, it didn't turn out to be that easy. That first $1 million really got us rolling.
There was an absolutely essential idea behind SASB, which was sustainability reporting was critical to understanding what a company is really doing in the real world.
The first publication of the standards was a turning point because it really emphasized the interest from investor side in gaining a better understanding of a company's performance, not just based on its financial numbers.
To me, the real significance was that they are industry specific, and so by publishing these for the first time, companies really understood within their industry what we as institutional investors needed to know.
Getting to codification was a huge step forward. We opened the market in London at the London Stock Exchange, and a few weeks later we were at NASDAQ, and from then on it was pretty consistent uptake of the standards.
We started seeing companies use the SASB standards for their industries. It started from 2 companies to 6 the next year, 10. But then in 2019, we surpassed the 100 mark. And it was like, oh, okay, this is game on.
In my first year at the IRC, there was actually quite a lot of nervous energy because we were creating something new and we didn't know whether they'd want the integrated reporting framework.
When you look at how a company operates, you don't have human capital in one room, natural capital in another room, manufacturing capital in another building. These things operate together. And so we should really report them on an integrated basis.
I can remember that first meeting, and I knew then that this was really important when I found that the global heads of all the big accounting firms, so the big 4, were all in the room. And that's the only time I'd seen them all in the room before, so I thought, wow, this is a significant moment.
The IR framework introduction was definitely the critical turning point of the reporting in Japan. It started to make the good example of the reportings, and the other companies started to learn from the first players to know what is the best way to communicate with the investors.
Integrated thinking actually changed the whole business community, especially in terms of how they look at success.
It's still very much needed and leading very much to where we are in terms of the IRC merging with SASB to form the Value Reporting Foundation.
We've changed the face of investing. We've changed the dialogue about corporate strategy. I can't emphasize enough how groundbreaking I think the work of both SASB and the IIRC have been. The key going into the ISSB is to continue that momentum and to transition that market support for the SASB standards and the integrated reporting framework to the ISSB.
bringing this combination into the broader remit of ISSB, I think is really getting ISSB to start from an extremely relevant position.
Our vision for the long term is that the ISSB can establish a global baseline of sustainability reporting standards and to ensure that these standards contribute to companies' transitions to a net zero economy.
Looking at the last 50 years, you must believe it will have a long-lasting impact on societies and the resilience of our ways of living. I think this is where the impact story of ISSB is lying, really.
The advantage of philanthropy is that we can take risks on big and bold ideas. You turned a bold idea into a reality. Bloomberg Philanthropies has been really honored to partner with SASB and to witness how this organization has evolved from a startup to now soon be merged with a global standard-setting organization.
The fact that today we are here celebrating that the SASB standards and integrated reporting are going to be embedded into the IFRS Foundation is something I never, ever, ever thought was even possible.
It wouldn't have happened if we had not had courageous people starting with crazy ideas a long time ago.
Thanks to each and every one of you for believing in the dream and moving it towards reality.
Thanks to all the VRF team for getting us to this place. It's an exciting day, but even a more exciting future.
So I hope you all found that as inspiring as I did. And I think one of the key takeaways is what a collective effort it has been to move from SASB and IIRC both being two startups a little over 10 years ago to now merging into the IFRS Foundation. And I think one of the reasons that so much was achieved so quickly is that this was a tremendous collective effort with many, many stakeholders coming together, investors, businesses, accountants, funders, civil society, who drove significant change in the corporate reporting landscape in a relatively short period of time. So we have a terrific panel of people today to discuss that, all of whom played major roles. So what I'd like to do is start by asking the panel all the same question and ask each of you to introduce yourselves as I call on you. Which, as you think back over the last 10 years and what a collective effort this has been, what do you think enabled such momentous progress in the sustainability disclosure landscape? And Marvin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. So Marvin Smith here, Director of ESG Reporting and Disclosure at Gap Inc. And I think it was a few different things that really enabled all of this to happen. I think, first off, it was just the right tools at the right time. I think if you look at the SASB standards and the integrated reporting framework, you have really valuable tools for companies to tell investors a story about how they're managing risks and opportunities related to value creation. And I think that the emergence of these tools were in direct response to a very obvious need in the market. So I think that was one thing that was just incredible. It was the foresight of the founders and leaders who understood that there was a need in the market and responded by creating really valuable tools. I think speaking specifically about the SASB standards, the industry-specific approach was novel and very valuable for investors. And so I think that was another element of the tools that enabled us to get to where we are today. I also think the broad investor support was really incredible. The work that you led, Janine, building a strong coalition of investors who had a unified voice asking for these tools really did a lot to advance the adoption and use of the SASB standards. And then, I think unfortunately, the world is both literally and figuratively burning right now. And so I think it's a lot easier to understand the importance of the financial impacts of ESG issues. And I think that all of that together really helped get us to where we are today.
Yeah, I think, Marvin, that's a really good point. And I think in some ways, the right tools at the right time is a very good point. And in some ways, the tools may have been slightly ahead of their time 12 years ago, and then they turned out to be the right tools at the right time when they were needed. Kevin, let me turn it over to you. What do you think enabled this progress?
My name's Kevin Dancy. I'm the CEO of the International Federation of Accountants, or IFAC, which is the global body for the accountancy profession. I think a couple keywords sum it up. I think in the actual question itself, it's just been such a huge collective effort and a collaborative effort to get where we are today. And I think this time it's real. We've been talking about sustainability issues for many, many years, but I think this time it is real. I think you have the confluence of investors and global capital markets saying they just need better information. The corporate reporting to date, just on financial reporting, is not giving them what they need. As Marvin said, the planet is burning. It's the recognition of the climate crisis. I think CEOs and organizations, even if they don't really believe in a lot of this stuff, if they're looking at their customers, if they're looking at their employees, and if they're looking at the people who are providing them capital, those three factors are all interested in ESG factors. So they ignore ESG and sustainability issues at their peril. I think now, of course, politicians and regulators have woken up to it as well. So they're engaged in the debate. And I think there's just been, with all the many different standard setters and framework setters around sustainability issues, and Janine, you would know this, having led SASB. You had SASB, IRC coming together with the Value Reporting Foundation, the so-called Gang of Five that put out their paper a couple of years ago, bringing this all together. The World Economic Forum, the large firms were involved in it. So really trying to come together and leverage all the good stuff that's been done in the past, so it can be a great foundation for the ISSB to take it forward. So really just a huge collective effort. And I think, just as I said, the recognition that this time it is real.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And I think that's a good handoff to Ilmi. And Ilmi, would love to hear what you think enabled this much progress, because you're coming from a pretty unique perspective as a funder.
Sure, happy to share that. I mean, look, I'll start by saying that this is among the projects I'm most proud of, having been involved in the 5.5 years that I was involved in creating the Sustainable Finance Program at the ClimateWorks Foundation. It's just amazing work, Janine, that you and others have pulled together. I'll admit that when we first started working in this space, my program was hesitant to work on the sort of supply side of disclosure. We focused a lot on investor demand, shaping and organizing it with initiatives like Climate Action 100+. And the reason is investor demands created these reporting regimes, which naturally led to a marketplace. And marketplaces are very hard to organize, no matter what the intention of the stakeholders are. But a couple things changed that I think made it sort of possible to race to this stage. One, I think the TCFD recommendations sharpened the attention on climate and created a set of shared principles that would help this smooth the path to shared standards. So all stakeholders talked TCFD recommendations, and that helped lead the way to real change and this outcome. Two, I want to specifically mention the work of Clara Marby and the Impact Measurement Project. Notably, another time-bound project that was time limited, like the VRF. They had the right recipe, and she had the right recipe to make harmonization improve where it could, that sort of gang of five work, but also with an eye towards where mergers can happen. Let's make mergers happen. And ClimateWorks and IMP formed a really close collaboration that was philanthropically funded to help support this work. And this is all ultimately was sort of a very complex corporate transaction among multiple parties to kind of pull it off. And I think there was the right recipe at IMP to help facilitate this. And then the last thing, just to mention funders like Porticus and the various funders that came in behind ClimateWorks had the flexibility to both establish a strategy and then change it over time as different things were moving. And then the last thing is really to point to the establishment of the Value Reporting Foundation and the ISSB was not only from strategic vision by people like you, Janine, and Charles and others, but also a lot of seriously low ego do-goodery. This is your success more than anyone. And I have said it before, I think VRF is at the top of the charts for the ratio of days of existence over impact on the world. But the willingness to kind of create something that was time-bound as a step towards this outcome is just really, that's probably the most unique feature that created this outcome. So kudos to you for that.
Well, thanks, Ilmi. And the VRF will only have been in existence for, I think, 14 total months. So it's nice for you to say that. And I do think definitely the consolidation in IFRS happened faster than we ever thought possible. I also thank you for recognizing Clara Barbie. And if we had one more person on this panel today, Clara Barbie would actually be one, for those of you who don't know her, who facilitated all of the Group of Five work that resulted in a lot of the foundational papers that ultimately led to this result. So I'm going to transition to Corinne, and you've been in this space and driving significant change on the governance side for a long time. So would love to hear your thoughts on what think you enabled such momentous progress.
Yeah, hi Janine, and greetings from Oslo. So I'm the Chief Governance Officer of NBIM, which is the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And as many of you have said, I think what is amazing is that all these stakeholders have come together and made this possible, made this happen. And just to start with the companies, I mean, I think the companies have had a lot of courage actually to start reporting voluntarily their sustainability information. But of course, there's also been a lot of efforts from the many standard setters that have developed voluntary frameworks and standards over many years, and really who have paved the way for what we are celebrating today. But may I also say something about the investors? I think there's been quite a lot of persistence from many investors like us, who have been asking this information for so long, because this is important to us. And I would also say there have been a lot of open-mindedness from the IFRS trustees to really expand the remit and in a way deep dive into an unknown territory. And finally, may I say, there's been some key individuals here that shown vision and humility, like you, Janine. I mean, who thought of the building block approach and were willing to work with others for the greater good. So let me stop by saying, really congratulations to you on your achievement.
Well, thank you, Corinne, and you've played just a major role for so many years. So thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Paul Druckmann, who, Paul, you've been here since the beginning as, the founding CEO of IIRC. So I would love to hear your perspective on what you think has enabled so much progress.
Okay, thank you, Janine, and what a wonderful day this is. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I think we all should be. Just going to the question, looking back, I would put it in with two words, and that's coincidences and collaboration. And it's no coincidence that, it is a coincidence that today is the hottest day ever recorded in the UK. So I'm sitting here in London with the hottest day ever. So that's quite poignant that we're sitting here. But if we look back 10 years plus, I mean, I've been doing this, as you indicated, Janine, for 20 years. But if we look 10 years back, it's the collective nature of progress was really not to the fore at all. Everybody was running their own route and quite precious about their own route in those times. And yet, at that famous book by Professor Harari, Sapiens, was released in 2011, just over 10 years ago. And one of the things it talked about was how the human race became so powerful because we worked together, whereas other species were not as effective. I mean, if I go back the 10 years, at the same time as SASB was founded, very similar, so was the IIRC. And the brand new IIRC Council, as Kevin said, as in the video, as Charles Tilley said, had all the major players from sustainability reporting standards and frameworks. And through that council, so was initiated the corporate reporting dialogue, something that hasn't really shown its face in the last couple of years. But it was based on IRC resources, but that doesn't matter. And we held regular meetings of the CEOs of the major players around the IRC Council meeting. And actually I called it the dialogue because it was starting to get to know each other and starting to get to trust each other. And it was a major, major step. Again, I don't want to give a history lesson, so I'm going to stop there. But nonetheless, leading on to recent years, we've already talked about your own role, Janine, and that of Clara Barbie, but also Veronica Poole at Deloitte, and amongst many others who have used what's been out there, and real driven individuals who brought about a remarkable collective engagement. And this happened in coincidence because the IRC was looking for a home, SASB was looking for a global presence, and therefore was looking outside of its, when you came in, Janine, we're looking outside of its US territory and its very narrow focus. And the IFRS trustees were enhancing their own thinking on their role because of changes that they were instigating into the fuller corporate reporting landscape. And really, its time had come. And I think that idea of coincidence and collaboration and the fact that the time has come now have been the rationale for why we've got to where we are. But I also want to reiterate the point that was made, that it is about individuals who have really put themselves out to make this to where it is over the last 20 years and more.
That is, Paul, that is such a good point about coincidence and collaboration and the role of the corporate reporting dialogue, because I do think, and to give a couple of other people shout outs, Ian McIntosh, when he was chairing the corporate reporting dialogue. And it was really through that corporate reporting dialogue that I met Charles Tilley, who at the time was CEO of the IIRC. And it was really also Charles's willingness to merge his organization. So just a lot of these connections that were made. And I do think it shows the importance of many of these collaborative efforts that enable people to build relationships and make connections. That is so important. I want to transition and dive a little deeper into the roles of some of these individual stakeholder groups. And Corinne, I'll ask you first about the role of investors, because investors don't necessarily have a reputation of working together, right? Passive managers and active managers and fixed income managers, just usually they're wired differently. And yet collectively, investors really have come together here. So would love to hear your perspective on that, and especially sitting at a large asset owner. What role do you think investors have played, and what worked about investor action?
Yeah, let me start by saying three things we have done that I think has helped this, and come a bit back to the investor collaboration here. But first of all, I think we have tried to be transparent. We have for a long time published so-called expectation documents and really addressed the company boards on what we expect when it comes to key sustainability issues. And I think just by being transparent on what we expect has really helped companies in their sustainability journey. So that's one. Secondly, we have had for a long time, have deep engagement with the companies we have invested in. We are invested in more than 9,000 companies. And part of that is that we have been assessing company sustainability disclosure. We have actually done this for more than 10 years, which really has informed our dialogue with companies. So we've had thematic engagement, we had engagement with laggards, asking them to start reporting on ESG, and we also have our portfolio managers discussing ESG matters with company boards and management. And last year we had almost 3,000 company meetings. I think this has showed companies that investors really value how they manage ESG and how they report on it. And finally, we have also engaged with standard setters and regulators. And as you know, we have published an asset manager perspective where we really set out our vision for corporate sustainability reporting. And we had bilateral discussion with a wide range of stakeholders, and have responded to numerous public consultation on sustainability reporting. And in all of this, we have promoted the SASB framework. So I think all of this together have really, informed many stakeholders, not the least the companies, how important it is for investors to get proper information on sustainability issues. And as you said, there's so many different investors out there with different mandate. But I think key for investors is that they want to do it, or common for all investors is that they want to have the right information when they make investment decisions. And to have the right information, it's more and more clear for investors that involves getting proper information on key sustainability issues in a consistent, comparable, and verified manner. So I think even though we are quite different, I think at the heart of it, proper sustainability disclosure really is something we all want.
Yeah, and I think this sounds kind of boring, so I almost hesitate to say it, but to me it's a market infrastructure issue. So investors may have different views on investment strategy, they may have different risk tolerances, they may have different objectives, but at the end of the day, they rely on market infrastructure to provide them with the information to make decisions. And I view accounting standards as market infrastructure, and now, sustainability disclosure is now that same level of market infrastructure. So I think that's been really, really important. Marvin, I want to transition to the company view, and I think you particularly have an interesting perspective, having been at SASB as a staff member and then moving to a company. What role do you think businesses played in advancing the quality of sustainability disclosure? And is there anything you learned transitioning from the standard side to the business side about improving sustainability disclosure?
As you noted, I did have the pleasure to work with you in the SASB VRF team for almost 4 years, and what was a really exciting time for the organization. And I think business played an absolutely critical role in advancing sustainability disclosure. And I think it was really in two ways. I think it was one, in adopting the standards even before it was cool and mainstream, and two, by working with the research team and various bodies on the standards and frameworks to help actually improve the standards content. So, now speaking from the perspective of where I am now at Gap Inc., Gap Inc. was an early adopter of the SASB standards, was involved in the industry working groups in the very early days of 2014 because of the credibility of the standards, the investor demand, and the thoroughness of the research and the openness of the process to provide feedback in building the standards. And I think it was a similar journey for a lot of companies. So in my role at SASB and the Value Reporting Foundation, a big part of it was getting market feedback in a way that would help the research team make better decisions about the standards content. And I think that the research team is absolutely fantastic and some of the best, smartest people in the world, but they're not dealing with all of these issues day to day on the ground. And so it's critical to have the perspective of business, of people who really understand not only the issues, but the nuance around data collection, calculation, verification, in order to make the standards content what it is today. And I think the quality of the standards really is part of what drove adoption. And I think in particular, it was really the sustainability professionals more than anyone else who played the biggest role. I think they were the ones that were sticking their necks out, pushing for this internally, even before the CFO was on board, even before legal was on board, which is the situation that we're in today, because I think they understood the importance and they were really dedicated to more transparently communicating their performance on ESG issues. So I think business was absolutely essential to driving things forward. And I would just say, in terms of what I've learned in my role now, kind of transitioning to the other side, going from standard setting to now working in a company, is you really understand in greater detail the value of the standards and how important it is to have a clear and consistent way to be able to tell your story to stakeholders. There's so much data that you can share and want to share, but it's nice in the SASB standards in particular to have something that's more focused on really those key issues that are impacting enterprise value creation. So couldn't have happened without business and without a lot of people who were willing to get creative and take a risk and understood the future of where things were headed and the value of the SASB standards and the IR framework.
Yeah, Marvin, that's really helpful, especially the role of the corporate sustainability officers. Definitely want to acknowledge that, and the leadership of many, many, many people within their organizations who may have been slightly ahead of their time at some point, and really played huge leadership roles, bringing all kinds of disciplines together. I want to transition to Kevin and the role of the accounting profession, and especially IFAC played a huge role both around the integrated reporting framework and, was a very early advocate for the ISSB. So can you talk a little bit about the role of the accounting profession and why you think the accounting profession wanted to play a strong leadership role here?
Sure, happy to. And I think I'll deal with it in a couple of ways. One is at the global level in terms of, for example, what we've been doing at IFAC over the years. And as you said, we were an early supporter of the IR movement. And I think it's, professional accountants have been involved and are key enablers of good corporate reporting, right? That whether you're a professional accountant in business in terms of trying to design the system that gives good data, whether you're supporting senior management to make good decisions or boards to give good oversight, how that gets into facilitating just good corporate reporting, which, to date has been focused on financial reporting. And then ultimately, in terms of providing assurance on that information. So I think if you look at professional accountants generally, they are key enablers of a good corporate reporting system. And as you look at what the needs are out there right now in terms of investors and others, there's just a need for better reporting that bakes in ESG or sustainability factors. The financial reporting is not enough. So there's a huge demand there. So when you think about it from a professional accountant's point of view, either as an individual, whatever their role is in that ecosystem, or as you think about it from the role of an organization like IFAC, it's both a huge opportunity in terms of the profession, but also a huge responsibility in terms of the public interest mandate of the profession to meet the needs of all these various stakeholders. So I think that's a key reason why we've been involved and engaged in terms of trying to advance this going forward. We have a long ways to go. We have, I think, done a lot of good work over the last years, but I think in terms of as the ISSB moves forward, we have a long ways to go to improve the corporate reporting, including both financial and non-financial aspects, to meet the needs of all stakeholders. And in terms of what IFAC's doing around that, we've tried to do a lot. I would say in terms of two fundamental aspects. One is thought leadership on a number of issues, whether it was trying to push for the establishment of the ISSB, whether it was trying to push for a building blocks approach to try to sort out how the reporting would get done, whether it's thought leadership in terms of how global standards become local, which is a key issue to work through, and also in terms of what the assurance should be and how the assurance model should work on this going forward. So there's that aspect to it, and then the other aspect to it, which is probably equally important, is having a very significant engagement in terms of not only with our professional accounting organizations to keep them engaged at the local jurisdictional level, but with other key stakeholders like the B20, securities regulators like IOSCO, trying to stay engaged. As you will recall, Janine, with the Gang of Five, as we went through that process a couple of years ago in terms of trying to get the IFRS to move across the line on this. There was, again, just a lot of collaboration because a lot of folks had many similar views. I think there was another aspect to the question that was there. I don't know if you want me to talk about, which is the role of standards. I can spend a few seconds on that if you'd like, just to tease that out.
Yes, please.
I think the role of global standards is just so critical to making this happen. It's just going to, like having a comprehensive global baseline will just reduce regulatory fragmentation and cost. It'll best meet the needs of investors for comparable information. It'll best assist companies who operate globally in terms of trying to, meet the needs and demands in terms of what the standards require and what investors need. And also, if you have a good global standard in terms of reporting, then that leads to the next step, which is making sure you have the right assurance of that information going forward. You need that reporting framework before you can really nail down what the assurance framework should be around that. So global standards are very, very important to making this happen. And I think the good news is, thanks to all the work that SASB, TCFD, CDSB, et cetera, had done on various standards, and what the Integrated Reporting Council had done in terms of an IR framework, I think there's a great base to build on. And I think you're seeing that as the ISSB is probably moving with a pace that we've never really seen in standard setting, because it's required. It's hard sometimes to go fast at the global level on standards because you need all that consensus. But they certainly are moving with pace.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. And I'm glad you talked about the value of standards, because one of the things I remember about the earliest days of SASB at the time, because I did start my career as an accountant and did financial reporting in the earliest days of my career, I just took the value of standards for granted as a given. And what I found is in the earliest days of SASB, we actually had to explain the value of standards. Why are standards useful? Why are they necessary? And I do think as now that the ISSB is going out to a much broader audience and many new people are thinking about this for the first time, we do have to start talking again about the value of standards and why standards, particularly in this space, are very useful. But I want to turn to Ilmi, and Ilmi, really acknowledge your contribution as a funder, because you funded both when you were at ClimateWorks, you funded the IIRC SASB merger, you provided funding for the VRF to merge into the IFRS Foundation. And that's unusual. I want to make sure that the non-funders in the audience understand that it's unusual for funders to fund infrastructure as opposed to direct services. So you made this decision to fund what I would call systems change or infrastructure. Tell me why you did that and what was driving you.
Sure, that's great. And apologies if I sound a little fuzzy. I have a spot of COVID. Okay. So just together enough to do this. So anyway, I have to say that was actually pretty easy, at least for my own decision making. I remember a conversation I had with Clara, again, years ago, almost sort of whispering that mergers would be the ultimate success and the ideal home for these voluntary standards, particularly around enterprise value, would be the IFRS. And we had to kind of treat this as sort of blue sky thought experiment. So as not to step on anyone's toes. But so once the mergers were in sight, it was really a no-brainer. I mean, ultimately, and this ties in with Kevin's comments, my program had always seen the goal of a global baseline of mandatory disclosure as the reason we were all doing this, and in particular on climate-related financial reporting. So we saw the merger of the IIRC and SASB and VRF and CDSB into the IFRS as a major accelerant of that particular future. I would estimate that we've taken something that would take about a decade to establish and compressed it into 2 or 3 years by having this be the process by which you have an international sustainability standard setter. And with climate change, it's kind of a race. So the speed of establishing these standards and making them a global baseline actually matters a lot to integrating them in the market and addressing climate and having our markets better reflect climate change in valuation. So ClimateWorks has just been the face of a coalition of funders who have saw that opportunity and acted on it. And just a word on some of the other funders. The other thing that was interesting about this is that it really reflected the work of both climate-focused funders and more broadly ESG-focused funders, organizations like Ford and Omidyar and Tipping Point that sort of broadly reflect impact funding. I think the reason that worked is we kind of saw an alignment of interests here on this issue. But it took a sort of change in the mental model. The way I think of it is, the way that bottlenecks work is that everything tries to leave the bottle at the same time and nothing leaves the bottle. And with the kind of ability to focus on climate standard setting first and realize that just ordering the exit from the bottle will speed everything up meant that folks that were not just focused on climate could really find common ground on getting this stuff underway and realize this was not climate taking over everything, but actually that it was sort of an orderly exit from the bottle. Because I think really a bottleneck is what ESG has historically faced, where every issue is obviously important, but you can't do everything at once. And so that meant you had a real alignment of broader funders and the climate funder community around the harmonization work and then the mergers and the establishment of the ISSB.
Thanks, Ilmi. Thanks. And I really want to acknowledge your leadership on that. It was extraordinary to bring together so many funders to fund something that was different. So well done, you. So I'm going to give Paul the last word on this question because you know, giving your CEO role, obviously saw all these different stakeholders come together. Would just love to hear your perspective on, you know, what do you think drove this success in terms of bringing, and you talked about this already a little bit about collaboration, but can you talk a little bit more about the various stakeholder groups and what you saw key to making this happen from stakeholders working together?
Thank you. And Ilmi, you are a superstar, so well done on that, because I do a lot of work with funders and usually they've got blinkers on, so congratulations. I mean, where can I start with this? I think the biggest drivers, if you like, for what we did with integrated reporting came through different routes and unusual routes, which is why I pick it up with what your conversation with Ilmi a few minutes ago, because actually you'd be surprised how important the Prince of Wales, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, was in making integrated reporting happen. You know, the IRC was originally created because the great and the good came, you know, got an invitation with the three feathers of come to Clarence House and have a conversation with the Prince of Wales, and everybody came. You know, nobody says no. And so it's not so much the technical side as sometimes just powerful people, powerful conveners getting, because he's not a powerful person, but he's a powerful convener. And his Accounting for Sustainability organisation has done a tremendous amount of work. I think the other thing that I would draw out is going back to the conversation with Kevin in terms of the accounting community. And, you know, we all live in this world, Janine and others, where lots of people are supportive. there's a big difference between support and action. And what the accounting community has done over the last 10 years especially is that action. IFAC have always backed the IIRC. Kevin's predecessor, one more removed, Ian Ball, was absolutely critical to making this happen because of the credibility that IFAC brought to this whole process. And Stathis Gould, who's still there, one of Kevin's key people, has been a party to that all the way through. And the major accounting firms, for once, frankly, came forward without a competitive nature and brought resources and global reach. They actually provided us with a significant number of people in order to make this happen. And what they also provide, that global reach, is a multiplier effect. And I think one has to work on that multiplier effect, just as you and your predecessor, Janine, have done with SASB. And also, we should remember that a lot of this goes way back. I don't know if you ever read the original seminal report written by Bob Eccles, Bob Hers, Mary Keegan and David Phillips, talked about the value reporting revolution, right? And wow, were they ahead of their time back in 2001. And there were people before them. Mervyn King, as chair of GRI, saw that actually GRI was a piece, not a whole. And that certainly was incredibly important. And his King Code in South Africa, another component part of that. But I think one of the things that I reflect on is that when we brought all those stakeholders together, from the corporate community, from the investor community, from the sustainability community, and from the accounting community, they actually respected each other. And I think that's, in the meetings we had, and in fact, Charles Tilley chaired our technical committee, and Ian Ball of IFAC chaired our working group. And it was fascinating how we had lots of really difficult conversations amongst the different stakeholder groups. But it was never one that was that had any disrespect in it, just different places. And I think that to me is the key that the stakeholders coming together now have started to see, not knocking each other and not being competitive with each other, but respecting each other's opinion and trying to find a way through. We certainly don't have that in UK politics, but certainly I think that's what's really happened, and what all of these individuals have brought to the core.
Yeah, Paul, that's so important. And I think if we can provide a model here for politics at both the national and the global level, we really will have succeeded. But I love your point about action. And I want to add to your two C's, the A of action, because I think all the stakeholder groups, the investors, the funders, the accountants, companies really did move from talk or ideas to action. And that was really a significant driver of success. So we're coming up on close, and I need to ask you all to wrap this up in about 1 minute each. But let's look forward for a second. So if you look forward 10 years, what do you hope the IFRS Foundation and the ISSB will have accomplished? And definitely, do you have a call to action for the many people listening today? Because the people listening today have been leaders to date, and definitely we need all of your support going forward. So looking forward, what accomplished in 10 years and a call to action. So Marvin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, 10 years. Wow. That's, as we know, a lot can happen in 10 years, but I'll just say quickly that just continuing to see harmonization between the various standard setting organizations, frameworks, not just because it'll make my job a little bit easier, but because new things will crop up inevitably. And so I think making sure that there's space for new things to emerge and old things to fade away and work with existing baselines that are created. And then I also think just ensuring that the ISSB is resourced and nimble enough to really address all of the emerging issues that will inevitably arise. I think time is moving very quickly these days, and ensuring that the content of the ISSB standards and relevant frameworks reflect all of those changes is going to be really important. And my call to action is just for everyone to be engaged in the process. I think it's really essential for all of the stakeholder groups that we've talked about to stay engaged and continue to provide feedback so that all of those resources are really useful.
Great. Kevin, looking forward, what do you think?
In terms of accomplishments, I would say three. One is obviously a kind of consensus that the reporting system is meeting the needs of stakeholders, investors for good financial and non-financial information, and that there's a robust assurance framework around that reporting standard as well. So on the reporting side, I think that's important. I would say inside organizations, I'm really hopeful that they will adopt an integrated mindset. This is really, playing off the integrated thinking principles of the IR framework, so that they will, bring the financial and non-financial information together within organizations to best support senior management and oversight by boards. And I guess the positive impact we'd like to see from all this is movement on the UN's SDGs and on the climate agenda. In terms of what needs to happen, the call to action, I think the words that have been used a lot today are commitment. Failure is not an option. A lot of stakeholders have worked hard together to collaborate to get to where we are today. But this is the end of the beginning. There's a long road ahead. So it's going to take commitment. It's going to take collaboration amongst global stakeholders. It's going to take collaboration amongst global standard setters and jurisdictions to make sure this happens as effectively and efficiently as possible. And my final point in terms of what needs to happen may sound a little boring in relation to everything else that's been said, but we just need better systems and quality of data to make sure that this can all work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Ilmi?
Sure. So let's see. First I want to see climate and then the full suite of environmental, social, and governance issues fully reflected in the front and back end of corporate reporting. And what that means in the real world is that valuations fully reflect climate and sustainability variables for every company. That means to make that happen, the establishment of the ISSB and then adoption by the countries that use IFRS standards. Then also, though, a closer and closer relationship between IASB and the IASB and ISSB, and a consistency of regional approaches like Europe's and the US's with the ISSBs. The thing is, that's about 5 years out. And you've asked for 10. I'd say full-blown stakeholder capitalism in 10 years. I think we should be able to get there. I really do commend jurisdictions who are trying to think beyond enterprise value as the only thing we're asking about companies to think about a broader range of stakeholder interests. And I think the best way to get to that larger view in disclosure is to use the ISSB as a global baseline and then build on that rather than building a fragmented approach. So if there's anything that I urge stakeholders, the broader set of stakeholders, is to really see the potential for the ISSB's standards to provide a global baseline. And where, jurisdictions that do actually pull off racing ahead on sort of impact-related metrics, that if they can build on ISSB, it's the fastest path to having those adopted in other jurisdictions. So I'd love to see in 10 years that broader view, and I think we could get there. But in 5 years, we should have all valuations reflect ESG variables fully.
Okay, big task. Corinne, what do you want to see?
So much has happened in the last 10 years. So I'm very hopeful that a lot of progress can happen the next 10 years. And so what I hope to see and expect to see is that ISSB, the sustainability standard, will be recognized globally as the reference standards, and also that national regulators will have endorsed them. Then I hope that ISSB will have adopted a series of industry-based standards, building of the great SASB's work. And with that, I hope that companies will find reporting easier. They will only have one set of standards to report again, and also have built up the expertise to report confidently their ESG information. And for us, like investor, that means, as I said, that we can get and be informed by consistent, comparable, and verified sustainability information on both environmental and social issues. But in the end, what I also hope is that, of course, that with all that better reporting, is that the sustainability issues by the companies will be better managed, and that really that they will use the ISSB standards to really demonstrate their progress.
Yeah, correct.
And of course, Janine, that you stay on for another 10 years and push this and continue your great work.
No, I need a holiday. But we do always say it's not reporting for reporting's sake, right? It's ultimately reporting to improve both investor and business decision making. Paul, over to you. Looking ahead, what do you want to see?
Okay, well, a lot has been said, so I'm not going to repeat some of the things that have been said. But to be controversial and looking forward 10 years and thinking back 10 years, I think we need to understand that the capital markets are not the be-all and end-all of corporate transparency. And that there is when we look at transparency, we establish that impacts rather than outcomes are the underlying principle of corporate reporting, and transformed global mandatory reporting to that end. And there's a lot of conversation in those statements, but I think sort it out with the GRI guys, and let's have the ISSB as well, not ISSB actually. Let's have the IFRS Foundation as the foundation of all corporate reporting, and let's save this planet, guys.
Yeah, so big task, Paul. Good closing words. And so I want to thank all of you. Each of you in your own ways really were a huge part of making this happen. So thank each of you for your leadership. Thank your organizations for their leadership. And now we want to show a little video to thank all of the thousands of supporters who helped make this possible over time. Thank you. And it's great fun to see so many people looking quite a bit younger than they do today. But lastly, I'm pleased to introduce closing remarks from the chair of the ISSB, Emmanuel Faber.
It took 50 years to shape a globally accounting system for global capital markets. And we won't have 50 years. We won't have decades. We don't have decades. We have years at best. And for me, the success is really be that in 10 years, ESG parameters as provided through the ISSB language for decision useful information will by then shape market allocations, will translate into equity and debt pricing very concretely. Because then again, this is what is going to change the economies and the world for a system that works in stability and resilience better than what it does today. So by then, I think one of the markers of success for me is actually we may have well moved the needle of what we call accounting. What we call accounting, where today we apparently don't count everything that counts. And so this is, a back loop to why this is such an opportunity in this consolidation, because it happens under the premises of the IFRS Foundation that also provides a unique ability to connect this connectivity with the IASB for ISSB. And so moving the needle of accounting by probably transferring some of what we do to quote unquote real accounting, I think is going to be an incredible measure of success in 10 years from now.
As Emmanuel mentions, we're working to ensure we count everything that counts. And I'm thrilled that the VRF's legacy is in very good hands with Emmanuel as chair of the ISSB and Sue Lloyd as vice chair of the ISSB. Emmanuel and Sue, many, many thanks for your leadership. So this isn't the end, it's another beginning, and we need your ongoing support. Please respond to the two outstanding ISSB exposure drafts. The consultation period ends on July 29th. And please plan to continue to engage in our work in the way that so many of you have over the last 10 years. So that concludes our program today. Thank you again for making this remarkable milestone possible. And we look forward to continuing our work together with all of you in our next phase as part of the IFRS Foundation. Thank you.